American culture. And living in a secular American culture, even no matter how observant you are, we tend to experience the holidays as discrete. You have your Rosh Hashanah, you have Christmas that goes with Hanukkah, and then you have Easter that goes with Passover, as if they are discrete moments during the year. But in fact, if we were living in the ancient world from which these holidays emerge, in a tribal community where everybody shared your religion, you wouldn't experience them as dots on a timeline. It would be one continuous story. Everything is connected, and it's connected to the land. So you have the whole month of August, which is Elul, which is preparing for the planting of the fall. So you're repenting, so that you should have a good harvest. And so then you spend all month of Elul with the shofar blowing every single morning, calling you to action, awakening you, putting you in the right spiritual framework. And then you get to Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and God during Elul, which the acronym is Ani l'Dodi v'Dodi li. The rabbi said, I'm in love with God, God is a beloved. God visits every community. That's why the shofar is blown to welcome the king. He's intimate. Then on Rosh Hashanah, which in the ancient world, which would have been the time of the enthronement of kings, God is enthroned as the king. You have God moving from friend among us to the elevated judge, and that's Rosh Hashanah. Then you have the 10 days of repentance. Then you have this fast day, but the season's not over that yet. So now we're cleansed. There would have been a Sadie Hawkins Day announcing marriages after the reciting of the forbidden sex rules at the last service at Yom Kippur. In my family, growing up, there was always a dinner dance after Yom Kippur in our shul, because it was a kind of, and that is in the spirit of, we're clean, now everybody should, the next generation should announce it. And engagements were announced in the ancient world at the end of Yom Kippur, but the season's not over. Then you have the harvest, then you have Sukkot, right? And it's all connected. This is the whole fall cycle. I don't want to waste a lot of time in this, but my point is that everything is designed to connect everything to it's an annual story until you start over again. And so Pesach is the spring festival, of course, where you have lambs and eggs, and just like Easter, because it's all about the agricultural symbols of spring and renewal. Of course, it's about, it's messianic, because everything that had been dead and frozen now starts to rise out of the crocuses are rising out of the ground. And then you start to count, right? Because what does Pesach celebrate in the mythic story? We know the agricultural, the Exodus, right? The leaving from the narrow straits Mitzrayim is a birth story. The narrow straits Mitzrayim, which means from narrow straits of Egypt. Through parted waters. You see how this is a birth? Through the parted waters of the Red Sea, and then you have adolescence or first you have, you're in the desert, and the people are brand new, and they get manna is their food. They wish for it. It tastes like all kinds of things, just like an infant's being nourished by breast milk, right? It all just comes to you, and then they walk, and then you grow up, and what do you need? After freedom, the freedom of childhood? Rules and regulations. So during that, and what is celebrated then? The giving of the Torah, which is what Shavuot is. It's both the barley harvest, and because we overlay everything with the Jewish mythic stories, the receiving of the law. But what do we do from the Exodus to the march to Sinai? We count every single day. And we count the Omer, right? And it's 49 days, 7 times 7, right? 7 weeks. So 7 times 7, 49 days. And then on the 50th day, just like in the 50th year, you have the Jubilee. All these numbers are repeated because this is religion. You get the receiving of the Torah. And that's when you read this story that we're going to look at today. the story of the Book of Ruth. And why do we count? We count, first of all, because we are taking, just like we experienced the Exodus at the Pesach Seder, we are actually taking the walk to the receiving of and commitment of ourselves to Torah. So everybody has to count themselves individually, and you count your days to make them count, right? And I think that's a really important message, because this is why we say blessings over food. Religion, and certainly Judaism, is a mindfulness practice. It's very, hippie to say that, but that's what it is. It's about, I wish I said blessings, so that before you stick whatever it is in your mouth, you stop to think about it. You express some gratitude, right? So it's a way of making you pause all the time. It's a kind of call to attention. So counting the Omer is just that. It takes 30 seconds or less, but it is a call to attention. I am counting the days, and I'm acknowledging each day my commitment to Torah. So, and then, then you have this story set in the barley harvest. So I'm going to guess that just like the book of Esther was probably some local story, so was the story of Ruth. Esther, I'm going to again digress. Esther, who's the main hero in the book of Esther? Mordechai. And where's the story set? Persia. And how much God is in that story?
No.
Exactly none. So Esther, Ishtar, Mordechai, Marduk. These are the gods of Persia. It's a local story made Jewish, right? That's what ancient religions did. They consolidated stories and adapted them for themselves. Okay, so Book of Ruth. I'm going to tell you my conclusion at the beginning, so you can help me get there. I'm going to do that. And I want to say, you know what? I don't want to do that yet. What I want to do first is I want us to look at the poem I reproduced for you. Did I get
There's one at the very end.
On the first.
it? Should be on the first page. Yeah.
March
It's on March here, see.
It's just the.
Yeah, it's already.
Yeah, I have a million versions of this, but I do not. Here we go. I'm gonna read it. This is Marge Piercy, contemporary poet, writing a poem about the Book of Ruth. The Book of Ruth and Naomi. When you pick up the Tanakh and read the Book of Ruth, it is a shock how little it resembles memory. It's concerned with inheritance, lands, men's names, how women must wiggle and wobble to live. Yet women have kept it dear for the beloved elder who cherished Ruth, more friend than daughter. Daughters leave. Ruth brought even the baby she made with Boaz home as a gift. Where you go, I will go too. Your people shall be my people. I will be a Jew for you. For what is yours, I will love as I love you, O Naomi, my mother, my sister, my heart. Show me a woman who does not dream a double, heart's twin, a sister of the mind in whose ears she can whisper, whose hair she can braid as her life twists its pleasure and pain and shame. Show me a woman who does not hide in the locket of bone and that deep eye-beam of fiercely gentle love she had once from mother, daughter, sister, once like a warm moon that radiance aligned the tides of her blood into potent order. At the season of first fruits, we were called two travelers, co-conspirators, scavengers, making do with leftovers and mill ends, whose friendship was stronger than fear, stronger than hunger, who walked together the road of shards, hands joined. Okay. It is beautiful, but look up and don't look at the poem. What is the poem say the Book of Ruth is about? Don't look. Do not look. Do not look. Do not look.
The relationship between two women.
The relationship between two women. Everybody always says that. Now you can look.
Okay.
Alright? when you pick up the Tanakh and read the book of Ruth, it's concerned with lands, men's names, how women remember it wrong, she says. And then she goes on to explain why in such a compelling way that she participates in the very misreading that she asserts. So it's really clever that way. She tells you the book of Ruth is not about the relationship between Ruth and Naomi. But it's so compelling, that relationship, that we remember it that way. And that's hardly part of the story at all. And then she makes that so potent, that relationship, in her description of why women want to read this as a love story between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, that when you leave the poem, and I do this all the time, I say, okay, now don't look, what is it about? You say, oh, it's about the love between, but no. Her exact point is, no, it is not about the relationship between Ruth and Naomi. And I agree that it is not about that relationship, though I also understand why that relationship is so compelling. What the book of Ruth is about, that I'm going to argue, is the relationship between faith and law. Faith in God and Jewish law. Faith and law. And another very important feature of religion, and Judaism in particular, I would say, is the triumph of faith over fear. It is about mortality. So that's what I want you to get at. And throughout these 4 courses, these 3 classes till today, I have been alerting you to patterns in the stories and the narratives of the Tanakh, of our tradition. And now I want to remind you of some of them, because the relevant background, one more thing. This is a very, very Jewish story for another reason. And that is the main metaphors of the story. The main metaphors of the book of Ruth are food and sex. And the female body is the body politic. That is, it starts with no food and no children. And by the end,
and a child.
We will have a baby, but not just any baby. And we will have abundance. We'll be the famine is over, and we'll be in abundance. And they are connected. The barrenness of the woman and the barrenness of the land, and the coming to fertility of both, is that they work on parallel tracks. The fertility of the land and the fertility of the people are connected in the story. So this is all in anticipation. So some of the patterns. Relevant background. Whenever heroes have birth stories, finish the sentence, you have a barren mother. And when you have a barren mother, it means that the baby who is born is going to be really important. And the more important the baby, the more elaborate the birth story. This is the birth story of King David, and by implication, the Messiah. So you can read this as the ultimate barren mother story, and we'll look at why, because we will have the ultimate hero born at the end. The baby born at the end of this story, we know his name, he has no story. All we know is that he has a bright genetic future, because he's the grandfather of King David. Bright genetic future. He's the father of Jesse. Jesse will be the father of David. David will be the ancestor of someday in the far future, the Messiah.
But doesn't Naomi have Machlon and Kilion, although they died?
They died, right?
And
That's
their
the point.
names are there also. Machlon is Machala, and Kilion is Choli.
Right, so death and disease and destruction. Right, and we're going to look at that in exactly 1 second.
She's not barren.
No, she's not barren. And in fact, many of them aren't barren. Sarah's not barren either. She's too old to have a baby. I mean, the point is that God needs to intervene somehow. Something special has to happen because there are no babies. Like, the men die in this story before their wives have any children. So you have these 2 women who have no chance of a child, because there are two women. Except, never say never, because if there's no chance of a child, there will be a child. And it will tell you how. I mean, through some kind of elaborate story, magic, intervention, angels will visit Sarah in the tent, or, Moses wasn't supposed to live because all the baby boys were supposed to die, so there's going to be a basket and a Nile and a princess, and all kinds of unlikely things will happen to make this baby special, right? To point to that. All heroes, I mean, Hercules, Superman, they have these, something saves them. The whole planet is destroyed, but that little Jewish boy whose name on the other planet was, do you know Superman? Mm-hmm. Superman was invented by two Jewish boys in Canada, right? His name was Kal-El, or Kal-El, the Hebrew name. And everything about Superman is, there's just like Jacob and Esau, Superman and Clark Kent, mild-mannered, and it's the integration of these, such a Jewish story. Okay, but so.
There's no woman and no child.
Exactly. Right. No, not every story is in this is in the barren mother pattern, but the book of Esther is in which pattern? Not barren mother. There are no babies in that story. That's not about babies. That book of Esther. That's about the bedrooms and battlefields. That's about the woman seducing the man to get power to save the people, right? That's the Delilah story, who's a villain and does it for her people. That's the Judah and Tamar story. That's the Beatrix story. There are different patterns, but these are the patterns that we are ruts in our psyche. The last of them is the one of the Akedah, and we just alluded to it. That is the near sacrifice of Isaac, and here or Sarah has this baby so late in life. Then we have this promise, the big promise of Judaism, the promise to Abraham: your descendants will be as many as the grains of sand on the beach and the stars in the sky. Abraham has the faith that will happen. He has one puny child. God says, kill it, and he's prepared to do that. And then how's this going to happen that we're going to be as so many? And we believe that Abraham believes, right, that promise will come true. He has that kind of ancient, intimate, mythic relationship with God. He doesn't live to see it, right? He lives to see the rescue of that one child from whom this promise will be fulfilled. We are the fulfillment of that promise. We imagine that Abraham saw us in some remote future, but he just had this one little piece of evidence, one little boy. And at the last minute, was that a close call?
What about Ishmael and all of his descendants?
Ishmael and his descendants, and there's Keturah and a bunch of descendants, but God is very specific that the covenant will be fulfilled, not through all those other people who are going to make other nations, but the covenant, Abrahamic covenant, will come through Isaac. Just Isaac.
You said that Abraham may have seen it all. Wasn't there a midrash that God told Moses up in the mountain what's going to happen in the future? Was the same type of midrash with Abraham?
There's a midrash about Adam, actually, but not about Abraham. And Adam goes up, and love this actually, this is relevant to this story, this midrash, the book of Ruth. So Adam gets to see all the future of history, according to this midrash, according to this story. And he sees all the souls that will descend from him in the form of candles. And Jews think of candles as a soul, as flames. And they're all, sort of equally bright. But one is very, 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 very bright. But it's very, very, very tiny. And Adam says, what's with that light, and why is that candle so small? And God says, that's the brightest light of all, but he will die young. And Adam says, give him 70 of my 1,000 years. Adam lives to be 930 years. Give him 70 of my years, which is the number of years of life as they imagined it in ancient times. And God does, and extends the life of that candle, and it's David, King David. So King David, David Melech Yisrael, the greatest king of Israel. So King David, his life is extended, that's a story, okay? But exactly, patterns. So this pattern of the near death of Isaac is the pattern that we always use when we think of Jewish history. It's, was that a close call, right? We almost didn't make it. If you've ever been to Beit HaTfutzot, the diaspora museum in Tel Aviv, on the wall when you get in there are the Crusaders, the Babylonians, the Persians, a whole list of people, and what do they have in common? They tried and failed to kill the Jews, to end the Jews, right? And that's the story we tell about our diaspora. That everybody tried to kill us, but you know what? Nah, right? And all of those peoples are gone, right? Only that little Jews that we survived. So that's our basic mythic story. And the other thing I tried to show you, in partly tongue-in-cheek, but actually take this quite seriously as a scholar, is how our jokes reflect the stereotypes that are the truths of our unconscious. So, and they're all old jokes, and most of you have heard them, but so here are the two that are relevant to this one. I'm not so good at this, but I'll try. Okay, so, and I won't do the accents. So a Frenchman, a German, and a Jew are walking in the desert. You know this, right? And they're exhausted, and it's awful, and it's horrible. And the Frenchman says, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have wine. And the German says, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have beer. And the Jew says, I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have diabetes.
We missed the.
I'm tired, I'm thirsty, I must have diabetes. The other is, the Jew walking in the desert, who says, I'm thirsty, I am I thirsty, I am I thirsty, I am I thirsty. What does God do? God, in the middle of everything, there's a little gas station with a Coke machine. And he drinks a Coke, and then he starts walking, and he says, I was I thirsty, I was I thirsty. Right? So that sense of, desperation, that nothing's ever, right, that we're living on the edge. Okay. All of this was clearing our throat. So whenever heroes have birth stories, the mother is barren, God's principal role is creator, he intervenes in history. The greater the birth story, the greater the hero. Also, the story of the bed trick is the one where to get power, to get the future she needs, to get the baby she needs. Think of Judah and Tamar. We told her that story about Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute. We have Esther. We have all these heroines who guarantee the safety and future of the Jewish people, who are, always threatened by an act of seduction, where they pretend to desire a man, but what do they really want? This is the battlefield. They want his power. Either his seed, if it's the case of Rachel and Leah. The other thing I mentioned is that Miriam is the only heroine that has a childhood. All the other women enter stories at the point of sexuality. They are either mothers or lovers, which is basically true in Western literature. As I said, you have your Madonnas and your whores. Your Mary Magdalene or your Virgin Mary. Your, Babylon, either Whore of Babylon or Ecclesia. That's the pairing, the two kinds of women. So, and I mentioned that here too because we're going to have a bed trick in this story as well, but it's not going to be nasty in that way. And always women's relationship with each other in the Hebrew Bible is one of envy because they're competing for the number of children. You have envious co-wives, even if they're sisters, like Rachel and Leah. It's about competing for Jacob's seed. And here that will be repaired in the relationship between Ruth and Naomi. Ruth will have a baby at the end, and she will give it to her mother-in-law Naomi, whose line is being continued by her having had this baby after she's converted and giving it to, so all these patterns turn up in the story, but happier. Right, there's a happier version.
Well, isn't Miriam part of a birth situation in the idea that she gives Moses to another woman to take care of? So there is some minor similarity.
So what I would say, I have a whole thing on Miriam, but what I would say on that story, which I also think is the birth story of the Jewish people through the Exodus from Egypt. That's our mythic immersion as a people that's going to receive Torah. In that story, through water, right? But Miriam is part of a conspiracy of 5 women. Yocheved, her mother, who saves the baby, and then Miriam herself, who hides in the reeds. Shifra and Puah, the midwives who defy the Pharaoh and let babies live. And then the princess, the Pharaoh's daughter. What's remarkable about those 5 women, so we always think of Moses as the leader of the Exodus. What's remarkable about those 5 women is it crosses boundaries of age, class, race. You have a slave and a princess. You have Shifra and Puah, who may be Egyptians, maybe Hebrews. It's not clear from the text, but so 5 women it takes to save the life of 1 baby, because that's their priority. And because they do, there's an Exodus. There's a Moses. And I used to think about that. I called it, all the holidays are connected. So what's the holiday that precedes Pesach? Purim, exactly. So in my house growing up, my grandmother, now I have this great big kitchen where my Pesach dishes just have a place. I just put tape on them, and then I untape it at Pesach. When I was growing up, my grandmother would schlep the dishes for Pesach from the basement. Right? So when Purim, we would go to, we'd go listen to the Megillah, the kids would get dressed up in costumes, and when the evening, when Purim was over, my grandmother said, every year, she goes, "Ay, it's Pesach." So in the mind of the women, Purim was the beginning of needing to get ready for Pesach. So that's, even though they're not so connected on the calendar, they were connected in women's time. I call it anticipatory time. It's the time of Shifra and Puah and Yocheved and Miriam doing the anticipatory work. My grandfather was the king of the Seder. But I knew that, in short order, that it was only so special because of all the work my grandmother did getting him ready for it. He was the king at the table, but she did all that cooking and preparing and cleaning and, making sure, attending to details, right? And no gum wrappers in your coat pockets, we were serious that way. So that attention to details, who's in the details?
Those 5 women are all named, and that's significant.
That totally.
Usually you don't have that.
Totally. So we digress, but that's okay. We're concluding a sort of larger study of all the patterns. And I just want you to see that when you step back and you see the stories in relation to each other, you really do see a picture of our own psychic life, our sense of ourselves. So I was at a close call, sex and food. Maybe get to one more, but let's start. Here I gave you actually the Hebrew. And in the translation it says, in the days when the chieftains ruled. Is that the translation you have?
Yes.
Right, exactly. In the days when the chieftains ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah and his wife and 2 sons went to reside in the country of Moab. I'm going to stop there and ask you to look at the Hebrew. Vayehi b'yimei shofet hashoftim. Okay, in the days when the judges judged. In the days when the judges judged, there was a famine in the land. And which land was it?
Moab. No. They went to Bethlehem.
Bethlehem. Beit Lechem.
And it says a house house of
Right,
bread.
okay. And Judah is names what people? The Jewish people, and remember Judah's story with Tamar and the bedroom. Okay. And Moab? Tell me about Moab.
They're not supposed to marry women of
No,
Moab.
Moab is the
And
single most cursed people in the Hebrew imagination in the Bible. And the rule is you may never marry a Moabite. Ruth was a Moabite.
And so was Ophrah.
Everything's going to be turned around. But now, go back. Beit Lechem, translate?
House of bread.
House of bread. Right. Elimelech, I'll read one more sentence. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, his two sons were named Machlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Beit Lechem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there. Now, I don't know how many of you know the Pilgrim's Progress, but this translation does not capture the Hebrew. No translation does. In the days when the judges judged, when was that?
I wouldn't say
A
that.
long time ago. Say what?
During the same.
Yes, it had no, right, all the way around in the book of Judges, people, and I asked that question, to rabbis. I used to teach in rabbinical school. They try to tell me what year it was.
Once upon a time.
It's once upon a time, exactly. Once upon a time. So already at the beginning of this story, it's from the story's own point of view. This happened a long time ago. I'm going to tell you a story about two girls a long time ago. And I'm going to start with, there was a famine in Beit Lechem. Beit Lechem, translate. House of bread. Once upon a time, there was no bread in the house of bread. And a man named God is my king, Elimelech, went with his wife named translate pleasant. God is my king went with pleasant and their children death and destruction to the accursed place. That's what Moab is. Once upon a time there was no bread in the house of bread, and God is my king and his wife pleasant went with their children death and destruction to the accursed place. That's the kind of story we're in. We're in an allegory, a fable, right? And it starts with, one more. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. God is my king died. Machlon and Chilion marry Moabite women. One named Orpah and the other Ruth. So since these names all matter, Orpah is the nape of your neck, right? So it's what you see when you turn a leaf. One is named nape of the neck, and the other one, Ruth's name, is not so clear etymologically, but it might be friendship, exactly, from Reut. So friend and nape of the neck. That's who they marry. Tells the whole thing, right? Everybody's named appropriately. And they lived there about 10 years. Then those two sons, Machlon and Chilion, also died, and so the women were left without her. So the woman, that is who? Naomi. She's the hero. This should not be called the Book of Ruth, but Ruth and Naomi are doubles, just like Yael and Deborah. Ruth and Naomi, the woman, Naomi, was left without her two sons and without her husband. So in the first 5 verses of a 4-chapter book, what's happened?
The line is risk.
The line is ended, right? It's destroyed, and it begins with complete. It's about life hungers, and it begins with complete depletion. Everything is gone, right? There's no food at home. They've left home. She comes with a son and two sons and a husband. The husband is gone. The sons are gone. There are 2 foreign forbidden daughters-in-law, and no possibility of. It begins with subtraction. All right, one more pattern, literary pattern. and that is the story of the journey. Every single hero in the Bible takes a journey. Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Joseph, Odysseus, Dorothy. The journey story is a motif. It's a literary motif. And all these heroes that take journeys, where are you going? Think Moses, Dorothy, Odysseus. Every journey is a journey home. Yes, every journey is a journey home. Right? So here's how the pattern works. Journey stories are journeys home, right? Because it's a metaphor for how do we get home again, right? What's home? The promised land. In journey stories, the road is life, right? We call it the road of life. And what you acquire on the road of life is knowledge, right? So Odysseus keeps learning, Dorothy keeps learning, the scarecrow, it's all about acquiring the knowledge that you need that will take you where you need to go, and where you always need to go is that place called home. So, journey of life, going to the place called home, and here's one. What's the difference between tragedy and comedy? Classically.
Happy ending.
All right, happy ending, and classically, according to Aristotle, it's simply how they end. Tragedy ends in death, and comedy ends in
Laughter.
think of Shakespeare. Tragedy ends in death, and comedies end in marriage. Cinderella. Comedies end in marriage, because marriage is an opening up into the future, right? Sense of possibility. Every fairy tale, they never show you the princess and the prince at breakfast the next morning arguing over the eggs. It ends with the marriage, right? Because that's the opening up. It's about whether the future is closed off or whether the future is opened up. But what I want to say to you is that the difference between tragedy and comedy, if life is a journey, and the road, if there's a road of life, and the journey is about acquiring knowledge, the difference between tragedy and comedy is whether you know what you need to know in time. It's about time, right? Whether you know what you need to know in time, right? And now think of every TV show you've ever watched, right? There's going to be a chase, and either in the nick of time everything's going to work out, or Romeo and Juliet, the guy's going to arrive 1 second too late after they've taken the poison, right? It's about timing, right? If you're sick, you want them to find the cure quickly, right? In time, right? That's the issue, is about timing. Okay. So, we are left at the point at which we've read about 6 verses here, but I promise I'll get us through. We are left with 2 women, or 1 woman and her 2 daughters-in-law, in the most hopeless of all situations. Naomi is in a foreign place without any men, no possibility of children, it's all over. And she has 2 daughters-in-law. Now think, what would you do? Your husband died, your sons died, you're in some creepy place, and you're old. Sarah. Go home I'm glad you feel that way. I think I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Right? If ever, someone could feel completely defeated, done, depressed, it's Naomi. She's the perfect candidate. She's an old woman in Moab with everything gone, but she does get out of bed in the morning. And for me, that's the point of the story. Had she not gotten out of bed in the morning, had she not said, even though I'm old and have lost everything, I still have the fight in me to go home because the famine is over in Bethlehem, there would be no story, no baby who's the grandfather of David, no David, no Messiah. Right? Everything in the story happens so that this Messiah will come from this woman.
You don't have twins here, you have two women. One goes away, one stays home. You
Right.
have to,
Okay, so let's get there, that's perfect. So they get up, they go. She's accompanied by her two daughters-in-law. Why do they come with her? Because when you marry into a family, if you're a woman,
Go to the husband.
you belong to the husband. But the husband's dead. So now they belong to the mother-in-law. The patriarchy goes from fathers to sons. The matriarchy goes from mothers to daughters-in-law. It's mother-in-law, daughter-in-law. That is the primary relationship of inheritance in all of our stories, right? Because the daughters-in-law marry the sons, right? And that's the major. It's not mother-daughter. It's mother-in-law, daughter-in-law. So they go, and so the daughters-in-law belong to her.
But the daughters get left out altogether.
Right, they don't even exist because we don't know, because women don't exist in the stories as children. They only enter the stories as wives or mothers, right? When they're sexually relevant, okay?
the daughter-in-laws are not good enough for their sons.
But not here.
Not here.
Right, because think it's Sarah to Rebecca, Rebecca to Rachel and Leah. I mean, that's the matriarchy. And now we have a repetition of the matriarchy here in this culminating story of Naomi and Ruth. But so they both go, and Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house." Not your father's house, your mother's house. "May the Lord deal kindly with you. May the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of a husband. Go, get married, you're young enough, have husbands." They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you on their account debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me." This presumes you understand something that you do understand because we talked about it with Judah. Levirate marriage, right? That it's her job, if you have that you marry the unmarried brother of your dead husband if you don't have children. But she says, "I don't have any more sons. And if I had sons tomorrow, you'd have to wait for them to be old enough. And you don't have that kind of time. Go home, get husbands." And she said, why does she have to say that?
To set them free of the obligation of.
Right, because there's an obligation that's presumed, so she's liberating them legally. I liberate you. Go. Get husbands in your own house, area where you used to come from. Go back to your mothers. I release you from this obligation. And what we know is the only thing that's important is that there be sons, right? And I can't do that for you. So they broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. And again, I'm going to give the Hebrew, the root davkaba. Root davkaba.
Glue.
Like glue. Devek is the Hebrew word for glue. And it's also the word that describes, it doesn't exist very much in the Bible. It describes Adam and Eve after they're expelled from Eden. So they leave to start the journey of all of human life and they cling to each other like a family, it's us. You mentioned this already, that you have two daughters-in-law. Why two daughters-in-law?
Get rid of one.
Wait. Well, you have two sons, so you can have two daughters-in-law. You have two daughters-in-law so that they're given a choice. Does Orpah do the wrong thing?
No.
No. She's completely in her rights to leave. But one person chooses to leave and one chooses to stay. And the double trajectory, that's why you have siblings often in novels, because they show you two possible paths, right? If you leave, you're out of the story. If you stay on faith, knowing that, this is not looking good, but we're in this thing together, well, you can be the grandmother of the Messiah. You won't live to know it, but that's what it means to obey the rules on faith, even when you don't have to. And Ruth says what is probably the most memorable line in all of Tanakh: wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may God do to me, blah, 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 if I ever abandon you. What does that sound like? Marriage. And what else might it sound like? And in fact, at many same-sex wedding ceremonies, that's what they say to each other. Where you go, I will go. Because it is a love, it is a commitment to being with you through thick and thin. But it also can be your people will be my people, your God will be a conversion, exactly. And some people use this at contemporary conversion ceremonies. Because I am taking on your people. I'm going to be buried in your cemetery, right? I am, where you go, I go. I'm in this with you, right? So it can either be a marriage ritual or a conversion ritual. It's neither, because in those times, apparently that wasn't a thing. Anyway, this is also all once upon a time, but we have this moment when Ruth joins herself to Naomi. When they arrive in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" "Do not call me Naomi," she replied. "Call me Mara, for Shaddai," which is a name for God. And Shaddai means breasts, God of the breasts. So whenever you have these rescue stories, God is named Shaddai. It's a maternal God. Shaddai has made me very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. And can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt so harshly with me? Okay. So first of all, there's a chorus of women. A chorus of women, like a Greek chorus, that greet her, and they buzz with excitement, and they say, "Can this be Naomi?" Interpret. Why do they doubt her? Why are they reacting this way? Why does it look different? Maybe she looks different. Maybe there was famine. Maybe she looks starved. Maybe she looks old. Maybe she looks awful. Maybe she looks like, the Musliman after the Holocaust.
She suffered.
Maybe she suffered.
Maybe they're surprised she has returned.
Maybe they're surprised she came back. Oh my God, you came back, which suggests that she had been important.
Yes.
Right? The fact that they could leave Elimelech and Naomi. Oh my God, is this Naomi? You're back. We didn't think you'd come back. Or, oh my God, is this Naomi? You lived. We didn't know you lived. We don't know, because the text doesn't tell us. But it does indicate surprise. And she says, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. Right? I am bitter. I left full, had husband, had sons. I come back empty. 1 minute ago, you just read something, or 1 instant ago.
She came with Ruth.
She came with Ruth, who just made this moving, resonant speech. Where you go, I will go. And this is, I came back empty. If I were Ruth, what would I be thinking? Exactly. I wrote that in the margins, and everybody gets that. What? Am I chopped liver? What do you mean you're empty? But she does get it, because they are empty, because they are one body. Right? Ruth and Naomi are one. And they're empty because exactly. Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughters, a daughter-in-law, Ruth the Moabite. Suddenly Ruth is Moabite. When do you become an American? When you go to France, right? Because, the American. You acquire an identity because meaning is located where difference is perceived. So suddenly she's a Moabite. And here's the end of the first chapter, and now, of course, I'm gonna have to just race through, but I will. They come to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. So it starts with complete depletion, and it ends, they're now in community, and there's a barley harvest, and Ruth and Naomi told Ruth and Orpah that there's no Levirate marriage possible because I have no sons. But suddenly what appears is Boaz, a distant kinsman. And why didn't she mention that there was a distant kinsman? Because what do we know about the rule of Levirate marriage?
Son.
Well, never mind, this story plays fast and loose with that. It assumes that any next of kin counts. But what we know is that this is a rule honored in the breach. Men don't want to do it. So it's really, talk about a long shot. It's not a son. It's a distant kinsman. Not just a kinsman, a distant kinsman. And, mostly they find a way out of it. And there are lots of legal ways out of it. So, luck would have it, Ruth is gleaning in the fields of Boaz. He's very nice to her. He tells her to stay close to his girls so that she won't be subjected to sexual molestation, which is already says something good about him, but implies that women alone, poor women in the fields, were subject to that kind of molestation. And Boaz tells her that I hear you've been very nice to your mother-in-law, and he prays for her. I'm now in the middle of the second chapter. He says, may the Lord recompense you for all your goodness. And already things are looking up. And then he gives her a whole bunch of extra grain to take home. And what rule is he observing? Leaving, because he's rich. He has fields. But he leaves the fields, the corners of his fields, it's called the lures of payah, which means corners, just like payot are the corners of you're not supposed to cut the corners, which it gives us the metaphor. Don't cut corners, right? Because you shouldn't cut corners, right? But it's about generosity, and that's why payot, not cutting the corners of your beard, is a reminder not to cut corners, right? It's about generosity. It's about obeying the rule of not cutting corners. So he doesn't cut corners, and he's generous, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law after she comes home with all this food, she says to Naomi says to Ruth, God, blessed be God who has not failed in his kindness to the living or to the dead. Why the dead? Because Ruth is all that's left of her sons, and through Ruth the names of her sons will be preserved, and her family, and God is being good to the dead. Because Boaz, she thinks, oh my God, Boaz is going to marry Ruth. And her indication is, and her premonition is because of his chesed, his kindness, right? He is obeying the rules, just like Orpah obeyed the rules when she left. But it's not about obeying the rules, it's about doing one better. Right? Obeying the rules and living in the spirit of them. It's about laws and regulations, right? I touched that at the beginning. So Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her daughter, I'm going to seek a home for you. And then she gives her daughter, this is the beginning of chapter 3, she gives Ruth a whole lesson in dolling herself up. Now, Esther, Judith, Delilah, Yael, all of them are seductresses. So now Ruth is being transformed into a seductress. And she says, I want you to take a bath, put on these perfumes, go glean. And here I am on chapter 3, verse 4. When he lies down, note where he lies down and go over, uncover his feet. I'm now winking at you just like with the royal scepter. Sometimes feet are not feet. Uncover his feet, he'll tell you what to do. You bet he will. And this is her maternal advice. She replied, I'll do everything you said. She goes, she uncovers his feet, and she says, and he says, who are you? And she says, I'm your handmaid Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman. That is, put the blanket on us, we'll do the deed. And basically she says, for you are a redeeming kinsman, because what does that mean? What would that be? It would be marriage, because there are 3 ways to get married. One is having sex with somebody, right? And that's very clear. And he says to her, actually, I do this, I'm willing. But there is another kinsman who's even closer than me. And we're like, what? First there were none, now there are two. But why do you need two?
So one goes away.
So that one can make a choice, right? Because Boaz could have said no, but he says, yes, I'm willing, but first I need to offer this to the other guy, and the other guy's gonna say no, as we'll see in a minute, so that Boaz could say yes. Because always somebody says yes and somebody says no. And this is what happens, even though it's not in his interest, because now the future is gonna belong to Machlon and Chilion, but actually we see that's not so much the game. So the second trajectory is so he says, come back tomorrow. Then at chapter 4 is the ending of the story. The Boaz convenes a Sanhedrin, a court, and this is chapter 4, verse 3. He says he sets himself up. He takes 10 elders of the town. He tells them to be seated. Then the other kinsman comes by, and he says, I have to tell you, our relative has come back, and she's got this land, and you're a redeemer, you can have it. And the guy says, okay, great, thanks. And then he says, actually, it comes with a daughter-in-law. And he says, never mind, no thank you. And they go through a little ceremony, the ceremony of levirate marriage, and at that moment, it's his choice. He says, you take it over for me. I'm happy to give you that stuff. So he likes the will, but he doesn't like the codicil. And so therefore he says this was formerly done in Israel in cases of redemption to validate any transaction. I'm at 4:7. One man would take off his sandal and hand it to the other. So the point I want to make there is now this was formerly done. What is the narrator reminding us of? That this story takes place when? A long time ago, right? And then, so all the people, then she has a baby, she brings the baby home to Orpah.
To Naomi.
To Naomi, thank you, and says, and all the people, again, the Greek chorus comes back, and they say, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah. That's why in the prayers, when we say in Imahot, instead of saying Leah v'Rachel, it's Rachel v'Leah. Because the only example we have of those two names together is here, and here Rachel comes first, Rachel v'Leah. So Rachel, but it's together, both of them. Not they're separate, not competing. May she be like both of them, like a mother of Israel, which of course she will be. And may your house be like the house of Peretz, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Suddenly the story of Tamar and Judah is imported into this story. And the beginning is also the book of Job, where everything is taken from him, but he maintains his faith. Every Bible story is in here. So it involves Tamar and Judah. The first of this whole book can be considered a history of the laws of levirate marriage. And even though it's a law nobody likes and nobody understands, if you obey the laws that you don't understand, like Peah and these little Levitical laws, that will bring redemption. You don't need to understand it, you just need to do it, right? So Tamar bore to Judah the offspring, and so Boaz married Ruth, and here's our Greek chorus. She became his wife, he cohabited with her, they conceived, they had a son. The Lord didn't withhold a redeemer. What's the Hebrew word for a redeemer? Mashiach. Right? Geulah, it's about redemption. The Messiah will be the Redeemer, the person who brings Geulah. And the women say, he will renew your life, sustain your life, for he is born of your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and is better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the child, held it to her bosom, became its foster mother. Yocheved, Moshe. Yocheved becomes the foster mother of her own son, right? Moses and Miriam. They named him Obed. We don't know anything about Obed, as I said. He was the father of Jesse, father of David. And then this is the line of Peretz. Peretz is the son of Tamar, the twins, right?
Yehuda.
And Yehuda and Judah. He got begot this one, begot this one, begot this one, begot this one, begot Boaz. Perez is the ancestor of Boaz. So without Peretz, without the bed trip, all the way back in the book of Genesis, after the son of Joseph, there would have been no Boaz. Just like there would have been no Ruth if she if Naomi hadn't taken matters into her own hands. And Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David. And now I want to just tell you something. Just indulge me for 1 minute. I said triumph of faith over fear. When does the story begin? A long time ago. And when does it end? It hasn't ended yet. It ends in the Messianic future. It's a glimpse of eternity. It's the baby on the lap of a grandma. Now, I want to jump in the story and say, Naomi, you're so happy you have a baby. That baby is going to bring redemption to all the world. She doesn't know that. Ruth doesn't know that. But this baby is the hope. It leads us to infinity, because Messianic times is, happily ever after. So the story goes from long ago, once upon a time, to happily ever after. But the trick of the story is that it takes a magnifying glass. You're on a long timeline, an infinite timeline, from the very beginning to the very end. And somewhere on that timeline are two women, an old lady who's lost everything, and her foreign daughter-in-law, in this allegory that is a Pilgrim's Progress, and the magnifying glasses on that little moment. And we watch them do everything right. Make all the right choices, obey all the little laws, be a kind of Job, and a kind of Sarah, and a kind of Tamar, and everybody who does everything right is contained in these two women. And because of that, they don't know that all the future everything good will come of their good choices. So how the future will contain the past is mysterious, right? We know that every one of us has DNA in our body that's as old as life on the planet, right? But the perspective of this story is so wide. If you have a very wide perspective from the beginning to the end, and you look at one dot, a wide view is the best view to have. And the widest possible perspective on life allows you to triumph over death. And that, I think, is the point. The message is, obey the laws, don't despair, leave your corners of the field unplowed. And each life is infinitely promising, no matter how small that person is and how grim things look. So get out of bed in the morning, right? Because if you do, and you do everything right, because that magnifying glass can move anywhere on the timeline. And who's on it? We are. Right? We are. And we don't know the good that will come from the great-grand students, or the great-grandchildren, or the great-great-grand of the people who are informed by what we leave in the world. But Judaism says it doesn't matter for you to know. You only need to know that that's the case, because what we believe is that you should obey the laws and have faith, and things are often grim and miserable, but if with this formula and a wide perspective, everything leads to the coming of the Messiah, because we are Messianic people. That's the story. Okay.